Two. Episode number 2 of the Bearded Ballesta channel. This is your host, Adam Ballesteros, bringing you my second installment of what I like to call Castle Black Bourbon and Coffee, where we cover everything Game of Thrones, the hit HBO series, which is airing its final season this coming April. I got a lot of positive feedback last week on talking about the Vegas odds of who's going to sit on the Iron Throne at the end of the day, so I decided to go ahead and take a look into a Deadpool. So we're going to talk about the top 10 people that are going to be expected to die in this final season. As you can recall from the previous episode, I'll go ahead and recap you on those top 10 people that were going to be sitting on the Iron Throne. At number 10, we had Cersei Lannister at plus 2,500 odds. And then we had Samwell Tarly at number 9 with plus 2,000. Gendry at number 8 with plus 1,600. Sansa Stark at number 7 with plus 1,400. Number 6, Tyrion Lannister the Imp with plus 1,200 odds. Arya Stark at number 5 with plus 1,000. And the Night King at number 4 with plus 900 odds. At number 3, Daenerys Targaryen with plus 600. Number 2, Jon Snow at plus 500. And then number 1, taking home the bacon at plus 130 odds, Bran Stark of Winterfell. So before we actually go ahead and reveal this list of the 10 people that are expected to die in this final season, I looked up on some articles back in the 90s actually of George R.R. Martin and what he was saying about who's going to survive at the end of the show. And back to a letter to his publisher in 1993, he actually adapted 5 major characters who he said are going to be hinted as the 5 major survivors that he has in mind for this show. I have you in mind that the show and the book are very, very different in certain ways, so this may not be true, but this could actually be what really happens at the end of the show. So, and I quote in the letter that Martin wrote, 5 central characters will make it through all 3 volumes. However, growing from children to adults and changing the world and themselves in the process. In a sense, my trilogy is almost a generational saga, telling the life stories of these 5 characters, 3 men and 2 women. So, as you could guess, the 3 men are going to be Tyrion Lannister, Jon Snow, and then Bran Stark. So those 3, according to George R.R. Martin, are completely safe from perishing by the end of the show. And the 2 women are Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen and Arya Stark of Winterfell. Now, I'm kind of surprised that it's not Sansa, because I feel like she's had a really big arc throughout this show. But according to this article back in 1993, George R.R. Martin did not put her in that final 5 list. So if we're going off of that, then, Sansa's fair game, and these 5 are going to survive. But, take it with a grain of salt, though, because this is the TV series, and it is kind of different from the show. Alright, so segueing into this next topic, we're going to talk about the Deadpool, like I was speaking of. And at number 10, with plus 1,600 odds, we have the Onion Knight, Davos Seaworth. When it comes to Davos, he's actually the moral compass of the show, and he has a lot of comic relief. It's kind of what he's there for, besides being Jon's new right-hand man. I don't really see him as someone that is a big character towards the end of the show. I don't really see his death being a big thing. He could die, but I don't think it's going to be some dramatic kind of death. It's going to be something behind the scenes. It's going to be something that, is in the background. He's going to die, whether it's fighting the Whites or, his ship gets blown up or something. If he does die, I really do not think he is going to die. Kind of an interesting thing about him, though, if you think about his actual character, he's been through a whole lot, but he doesn't really express hate for certain people. Stannis Baratheon, who he was his right-hand man for pretty much until Stannis kind of disappeared in the background of the show. We didn't really get clarification if he's dead. We just kind of assumed that he is. But Stannis cut off his fingertips, or his fingers, and he still didn't really have any, remorse towards him. Still was Stannis, his, true-born king. Another person as well, basically, is Tyrion. Tyrion Lannister is the one that caused all the explosions of the ships to Stannis' fleet at the Battle of Blackwater Bay. So Tyrion's pretty much the cause for, the fleet getting destroyed, so they can get to, take over King's Landing, and the death of Davos' son. So he doesn't have remorse for him either, which is strange. But the main person and the only person that he really expresses any hate for is Melisandre, the Red Woman. He has good reason, though. If you can recall back in one of the earlier seasons, Melisandre is the head honcho that pretty much convinced Stannis Baratheon and his wife, if you want to rule Westeros, if you want to be the true king, and you want to be Azor Ahai, you're going to have to sacrifice your youngest born daughter, Shireen Baratheon. Which you can recall, Shireen and Davos had a very, very good relationship. She taught him how to read, and he took care of her, and she was kind of shunned away by her parents because she had grayscale, but Davos didn't see her any different. So whenever Shireen was burned at the stake and everyone was standing around watching, Davos actually wasn't present for that. But when he found out later, I mean, he was distraught, and he pretty much swore to execute her for the death of Shireen. So I feel like if he does die, it might have something to do with Melisandre. But if anything, I think Melisandre is going to die before Davos would. Another thing as well is Liam Cunningham, the actor, says that his character's best memory actually doesn't happen until this final season. So if he dies, it might be later in the season. I don't think it's going to be towards the beginning. It's going to be something later on because apparently something with Davos is, in the making. It's going to be something big. So we're going to have to stay tuned for that and see exactly what Mr. Cunningham is talking about. At number 9, we have Jorah Mormont, the disgraced heir to Bear Island. If you can recall, Jorah Mormont started off this show spying on Daenerys Targaryen, and then eventually pretty much fell in love with her and swore to protect her and do everything she says because she is his queen. He's been through a lot, so I don't really see him dying. I could see him surviving this show, but if he does die, I'm surprised he hasn't died yet. The man beat Grayscale, which is kind of like the AIDS, I guess, of Westeros. Your skin starts to, take the form of something from I Am Legend, and then you're sick and you're pretty much doomed to die at that point. And then Samwell in the final season, or the most recent season, came through and gave him the miracle cure and saved him. So I'm not too certain that his grayscale is foolproof. I think that the grayscale could maybe flare up again. That could be something that will cause him to die. We'll wait and see on that, but I feel like if he's going to die, if he's going to end by the end of the show, it could have something to do with grayscale. I don't think it really will have anything to do with the whites because he's already went north of the wall. He seemed fine, and I feel like there's a connection between what's going on with the whites and what's going on with grayscale. I feel like there's some type of connection that we haven't really either figured out yet or they haven't really discussed yet in the show. So number 9, Jorah Mormont. I wouldn't really I wouldn't take him seriously as someone that might die in the show. I just don't. And on top of that, the actor Ian Glenn that plays Jorah Mormont, he's believed to confirm that he actually will survive the series. Back in an interview back in October of 2018, I guess he was quoted for making comments that his character is going to survive the show, which I I don't know. I didn't write the show, but if I had to put money on it, I would say that he's probably going to survive because he's been through hell and back. The next person at number 8, and actually Jorah Mormont, when I go back, was at plus 1,400 odds. So is this other person, so they're actually basically tied at 8. At plus 1,400 odds, we have Gendry, the illegitimate bastard son of Robert Baratheon, the last living son of Robert Baratheon. And actually, an interesting thing is he might actually be the son to Cersei. It's not a popular opinion, but if you can recall back in season 1, Cersei's having a conversation with Catelyn Stark. She talks about her firstborn son, and she, in quotes, says he is a black-haired being who died shortly after birth. Cersei's also known to lie, so there would be something cool about this if, we find out in this next season if they can reveal that, oh, they're actually somehow related, whether it's his mom or whatever. But, I mean, this is Game of Thrones. For some reason, we have all of Westeros and Essos, but it's like the same 10 people that the story is really about. So I wouldn't be surprised if Gendry actually is not an illegitimate son, if he isn't just the bastard, if he actually is Robert Baratheon's son. So I guess we'll, stay tuned and see what happens with that. He also went north of the wall, survived that, partially because he's got, insane speed according to the show. Ran away like Forrest Gump, like it was nobody's business. and escaped, getting killed north of the wall to go warn everybody else. I do think that if he was going to die, it probably would have happened then, but I guess we'll just wait and see this next season. There's a lot of big battles that are going to potentially happen with, the Night King and all the dead people, so we'll see if he survives. I think he could die. He really isn't that important to the end of this show, uh, unless he, becomes the true born king, which I don't see that happening. I feel like that's living on a prayer at this point. At number 7 with plus 1200 odds, and this I don't like to hear this because it's one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character. We have the Hound Sandor Clegane. Uh, Part of the reason I love the Hound, besides his I don't give a shit attitude, is he's got the biggest arc in this show, in my opinion. He's the biggest anti-hero. He expresses, if I could put it in 3 words, he expresses loneliness. He is a very depressed individual, and he is all about survival. He doesn't really get emotionally involved with people, mostly in the beginning, and he tries to, stick to those throughout the show. But you can see throughout his arc that he is a changing person. He starts off, and actually the reason he gets on Arya's kill list is because he runs down the butcher boy Micah, which is Arya's best friend for, some stupid shit that Joffrey Baratheon made up when he really got his ass kicked by Arya over at the river, up in Winterfell. So that's how he ended up on the kill list. If you go through him as a character, I mean, although he's a really tough guy, he doesn't give a shit. He's all about survival. He's expressed a lot of human traits. He helped protect Sansa in one of the earlier seasons when she's about to get raped in King's Landing. He protects her. Whenever Stannis is gonna basically attack King's Landing and he's assaulting it, and he's actually about to take over before Tyrion launches all the hellfire, he says, F the king, I'm not staying here, and he gives Sansa an out to get out of King's Landing, which was very shocking to me at the point, but now that we're this far into the season, I can see how that makes sense. He's defeated Beric Dondarrion with the flaming sword and everything, so that was. I feel like Beric could have had a good chance to kill him, but he didn't. He's got his brother, the Mountain, who definitely poses a huge threat to him. There's you know, a spoken of Clegane War that we're all waiting on in this final season, which I hope we get, and if we do get it, I pray to the Game of Thrones gods that he survives this show. I do not want to see his dumbass older brother beat him at the end of this. I just that would be that would break my heart if that actually happened. He's fought Brienne of Tarth. Brienne of Tarth pretty much left him dead. One of the biggest arcs for him is, we are assumed to think that he is dead at this point. And he comes back later towards I believe it's the 6th season, and you see him with a bunch of peaceful villagers out in a quiet settlement. And he's kind of just learning the ropes of, being a regular life, not being surrounded with violence and murdering people. And, we think that he's getting this redemption. We think that he's turned over a new leaf and he's this new hound. He's not an angry, aggressive guy as much anymore. And then towards the end of that episode, it all goes to the shitter because he comes back and his entire village is completely murdered and just slaughtered to death. And the main guy that was giving him assistance and he was kind of the ringleader of everything is sitting there hanging. And so, you're like, oh, well, that's over with. The Hound's back, and he picks up his axe and he goes after the guys that murdered him, and, the rest is history. He's also been north of the wall, so I think that was another, potential point where he could have died. So there is an opportunity for him to die in this next season, but I think if he dies, it might be at the hands of his brother. I wouldn't say that it's going to be in a battle with the Whites. I think that he's too badass of a guy. He's too big to this to actually die from a White Walker. I think it's going to be because of his brother, and if he doesn't get killed by his brother, I think he's going to survive and live out the rest of the show. And at number 6 with plus 1,000 odds, we have Sir Bronn of the Blackwater. Now, Bronn is a sellsword. He's been through a lot. He's another one of those guys that I think that he's a great chance of dying, but he's also been through a lot as well to where I think that he probably could have died by now. But I think what ended up happening in the show versus the books is the character that plays, or the actor that plays him, and his character overall became a fan favorite, so they had to find ways to keep him on. But he had a lot of really close calls. Back in one of the earlier seasons, he fights for Tyrion when Tyrion has to face a trial by combat over in the Vale for the murder or the conspiring to murder Lysa Arryn's husband. And Bronn steps up, says, "Yeah, I'll take it. You're gonna offer some, Lannister gold. I'll take that bet. Yeah, I'll go ahead and fight for you." And he dramatically defeats the Knight of the Vale. That is, the most badass guy over there, and kicks him through the moon door, and pretty much sails at the ground. He's dead. So that was pretty interesting to watch, and I think that could have been a big potential part for him to die in. And another big part would be the fact that he didn't go north of the wall or anything, but if you recall the loot train battle with the dragons, he could have died there. But the biggest thing was he shot down the dragon, so he was kind of the hero of that entire scene. He kind of showed that the dragons aren't immortal, that they are beatable, and he's been through various fights. He's this very tough guy. He's got a great relationship with Tyrion. I could see him dying eventually throughout this final season. We'll see what happens. Keep posted. But I guess I would take these odds and I would go ahead and bet on Sir Bronn of the Blackwater to die at plus 1,000. You put 100 down. That's a pretty good bet. I would take that. I could definitely see him dying. And at number 5 with plus 800 odds, we have Tormund Giantsbane, the big red beard wildling from the north of the Wall. So this, we don't even know if he really is still alive at this point. The last that we saw of Tormund Giantsbane was he was last seen atop the wall of Beric Dondarrion. The Night King shows up with his 747 Viserion dragon, lights that thing up with his blue flame, and the wall comes crashing down. So if he survived that, I don't see Tormund dying either. Tormund's been in a lot of battles. He's been fighting the Night's Watch for years. Uh, the biggest episode of all, my favorite episode of this whole show that he survived through was the episode where they go to Hardhome, and actually the episode is called Hardhome. If you recall, Hardhome is one of the wildling towns that's on the water. It's actually closest to Eastwatch by the Sea, from what I recall. And that was one of the craziest battle sequences you could ever see with all the CGI, and it's really our first our first showdown between Jon Snow and the Night King's, big top general kind of guys. At that point, I almost thought Jon Snow was going to die. I thought half of them were going to be wiped out. And that's when we see Jon, take Longclaw and pretty much kill one of the White Walkers. And it was one of the greatest scenes I've ever seen on television. But I don't know. I guess, Tormund could die. I don't think he's going to die at plus 800. I wouldn't take those odds unless it was, over plus 15. But I don't write the show. Who knows? I mean, he could already be dead, though, like I said. Um, Another point, too, that, just came to mind is if you think back in the previous season when they're fighting north of the wall against the White Walkers and they're trying to capture that white and they're all surrounded in that frozen lake. He's, getting drugged by 2 White Walkers, and you think he's getting drugged to his death, and we're thinking, man, this is the second of the big characters north of the wall that's going to finally perish. And he got saved out of nowhere by Sandor Clegane. So, thank you, the Hound. Yeah, he saved another good one. Number 4, also plus 800 odds. So I guess Tormund and this guy could be tied at number 4. We have the asshole and the king of the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy. So Euron Greyjoy is probably the least popular character on this whole show, besides the Sand Snakes, which thank goodness they're gone, because that part of the story I could just give 2 shits about. So Euron Greyjoy murdered his older brother Balon Greyjoy, who is the father of Yara and Theon Greyjoy, who are the only 2 surviving children of Balon. So they got this whole, you know, family issue going on. The whole family tree is kind of fighting each other. Euron basically came through, claimed the Iron Islands. Yara claimed it as well. Theon backed Yara. Euron said, I don't really care. I'm going to take over. So Yara and Theon are stealing his whole fleet, and they go to, team up with Daenerys Targaryen. So Euron essentially builds an entire fleet of ships, and then he ends up going and teaming up with Cersei. So he's on Cersei's side. The last thing that we actually see of him is that he pretends that he's going to go back to the Iron Islands and he's not going to fight because he's, so scared of these White Walkers, doesn't want to do it. And we find out from Cersei in a reveal to Jaime Lannister that he actually has gone off to Essos to go pick up an army for the Lannisters in order to fight the North. So they're basically gonna, throw a ploy on the North and say, "Oh, we're gonna help you with the White Walkers," but really they're gonna undercut everybody. And I think they're just gonna, let everybody in the North die off fighting the Whites or whatever, and they're gonna try to take over Winterfell and just run all of Westeros. And also right now he has Yara Greyjoy captured, and he's defeated Dany at the Blackwater Bay battle, first episode of the most previous season. I think Euron's definitely going to die in this show. He hasn't died yet. He's been in a lot of crazy battles, and he definitely has a screw loose. It's kind of a weird dude, but I think that it's a guarantee that he's going to die, and that's I would say more than plus 800. I would say he actually lower than that. I think that he's got a better chance of dying than some of these other characters. At number three, we have with plus 500 odds, we have Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. Uh, so the Mountain is, if I could put in one word, he is all of brutality. Uh, for the first time ever, interesting fact about this final season, I read that the actor that plays him, the huge bodybuilder guy, they actually had to hire a stunt double for this season 8. So I think there might be a Clegane Bowl on the way. Stay tuned. We could actually see Sandor and Gregor fighting for once and for all. And that's going to be a battle where no one person's walking away from that, or neither of them are walking away from that. So we got to stay tuned for that. If you can recall from the Mountain, he's he's one of the most hated characters in the show. Or you love him if you like to see him, murder little kids and women. He murdered Elia Martell and her 2 children, who were birthed by Aegon Targaryen before his, annulment, and then he went off with little Stark girl. But one of the worst crazy scenes of this show is when he's fighting the Viper for the trial by combat for Tyrion Lannister, and you think he's gonna get defeated. You think that's it for the Mountain. The Viper's got him. Oberyn Martell's standing over him, and he gets cocky. He gets in his head. He's like, Elliot Martell, you know the name. You killed her. You raped her. You murdered her children. And then as soon as those words leave his mouth, he's kind of looking around, and you see it in Illyria's eyes. We won. And then all of a sudden, boom, he gets tripped. Gregor hops on top. And Gregor just, takes over, and he's saying, "Elia Martell, I raped her, I killed her, I smashed in her head like this," and boom, pops his eyes. End of story for him. That was maybe one of the worst deaths in this entire show. Uh, but the thing, though, that a lot of people didn't realize why this happened, but to go back to the actual fight, he gets injured. He gets his hamstring kind of severed by the Viper, by Oberyn Martell. The Viper, when you go back and you look into it, he actually used manticore venom, and he, dipped his spear with it. So whenever he stabbed the Mountain's suffering from that right now. It's one of the most deadly poisons in the world, and actually the venom causes his wounds to basically just sputter up, and it's forcing him to live through this. So he's remaining conscious through this essentially disease that is killing him every day. Then you have Qyburn comes along, takes the Mountain. He's a former maester, but he's pretty much got kicked out of the Citadel because of his inhumane practices and running all these experiments on live human beings, and the Citadel just did not want to do with that. And so now you have the Mountain, who is like this. It's almost like he's his own White Walker. He's like a conscious White Walker, and I don't believe he can really talk, but according to Cersei and according to Qyburn, he has sworn off speaking until he's murdered all of Cersei's enemies, and he's washed away all the dead from the world. But really, I just think that he's kind of a zombie at this point. He's definitely going to die in this season. There's no reason to keep him alive anymore. He he should have been dead already, and he's kind of one of the worst people in this show, unless you love the whole Game of Thrones thing where you love watching little kids get murdered. And I mean, he took Aegon and Aaliyah's baby and bashed his head in the wall, swung him around and shook him. I mean, that's that's messed up. So he's probably got some karma coming his way. So we'll stay tuned for that in this following season. All right, so now we get down to the top 2 people. Both of these people, I think, are going to die. They're both not really that much needed into this final season. They're not really a big part of the show anymore. But at number 2 with plus 400 odds, we have Theon Greyjoy. Now, Theon's another one of those guys that, much like most of these guys on this list, he's been through hell and back. He's got a crazy character arc, but it's not for the good. It's for the bad. He starts off as this very cocky, arrogant douchebag who is basically a servant to Eddard Stark, even though he really got captured. The reason he got captured or, had to stay with the Starks is because his father Balon and the Iron Islands rebelled against Robert Baratheon and the Iron Throne. They got totally obliterated, and so part of the truce for everything going back to normal is, hey, we get to keep your youngest son Theon, and he's going to stay here and basically be a servant to the Starks. Although the Starks treat him very, very well, and through their upbringing, he became a very skilled archer. But he's, like I said, he's been through a lot. He it's all karma based though. I mean, if you go back to it, the Starks, whenever Eddard gets murdered, Robb Stark takes his whole army and basically all of the North down south to go fight, and he's planning on going over to the Iron Islands. Theon is, and he's gonna convince his father, hey, I need to go help Robb out. Robb's pretty much like my brother. I want to go help them. We got to go beat the Lannisters and avenge Eddard Stark. And his dad's like, dude, don't you remember? You're a prisoner. Are you like a Stark kid now? Are you even a Greyjoy anymore? He gets into his head. So Theon, comes up with this really brilliant idea to go ahead and attack Winterfell. A defenseless Winterfell, I remind you. There's pretty much nobody guarding it. You got little Bran Stark who's pretty much ruling in place of everyone that's gone. He doesn't have legs that work, and he's got being carried around by Hodor, and it just turns into this giant shitstorm that Theon causes. And so it's that led to all this karma. Although he's kind of paid for most of it now, I guess you could say. I mean, later on, Ramsay Bolton comes in and cuts off his manhood and makes him go crazy and makes him think his name is Reek, and he just brainwashes him, and it was a mess. He's definitely suffered a lot in this show. So I think that if he dies, which I think he is going to die because he's not really needed much more in the show, it's going to be going back to fight Euron to save his sister Yara. The last place that we saw him in this most previous season, he had just talked to Jon. He had just spoken with Jon, and Jon kind of gives him a little pep talk, like you are what you are. Like you just because your last name's Greyjoy doesn't make you just a Greyjoy. Like our father looked at you like his son, so you just gotta basically control your own fate. And the words basically click in Theon's head. So Theon goes out and he's talking to uh, the other troops of the Iron Island that are about to sail back, and they're pretty much giving up on saving Yara. And he's getting his ass whipped, and you think that he's being left for dead, and then Theon finds it in him, and they cue all the heroic music, and Theon comes and beats this dude to a pulp. And Theon rallies the troops, says, no, we're gonna go back and save Yara like Yara tried to save me when I was a prisoner to Ramsay Bolton, or Ramsay Snow at the time. So I think that Theon and his little band of sailors, they're on their way to their own death. They're going to fight Euron. I think Euron's going to kill Theon. And I mean, he's either going to kill Theon first, or at number 1 with plus 200 odds, we have Yara Greyjoy. Yara Greyjoy is not really needed at all in this show. Yara Greyjoy is Theon's older sister. She tried to save him earlier in the show, and that didn't go too well because Theon was kind of a pansy, and at the time he had this little alter ego called Reek, because he was pretty much Ramsay's little bitch, and yeah, and so now she's captured. She's captured by Euron, and she's pretty much left for dead at this point, and so now we have Theon that's going to save her, but I really don't think he's going to be successful in this. Uh, it's just not going to happen. Uh, it sucks for her too because she had this big plan when they're first at Dragonstone in episode 1 of this final season, or the previous season, and she's saying, we need to go and attack King's Landing immediately. We need to go fight like right now. Get them while they don't have an army. They're exposed. We have dragons. And Tyrion says, no, like we shouldn't do that. We can't attack Westeros with Westerosi people. That just doesn't make sense. So the new plan that Tyrion comes up with is, we're gonna have you and your brother escort Illyria Sand back to Dorne. We're going to take their military, and at the same time, uh, Marta or Tyrell is going to take her family up to Highgarden. They're going to go defend Highgarden, and they're going to attack from the west, headed to King's Landing. And as you know, it all goes to show, everything goes to shit. They decide to go sack Highgarden, and nobody's at Highgarden. All the gold is gone because the Lannisters already took it. So at this point, they're shit out of luck. So yeah, I think Yara's definitely gonna die. Do I feel bad about it? Not really, not in the slightest. She wasn't too important to the show. She was a nice character. You know, she was good to her brother, and you know, she pretty much was like the older brother to her little brother. And you know, unfortunately, Theon put them in a position that he's not going to be able to get him out of. So yeah, I would say Yara is definitely going to die. Plus 200 odds, that's a given. You're not really going to get anything if you bet on that. But yeah, I think that she's definitely doomed in this next season. So those were the top 10 of who's going to die on the Deadpool for this final season of Game of Thrones. There were three people though that I don't know why they weren't on this list at all, even in the top 15. 11 through 15 actually went Brienne of Tarth, Cersei Lannister, the Night King, Varys the Spider, and then Arya Stark of Winterfell. So I could see all five of those people dying, but you know, these next three I'm about to say, how are they not on this list? Number one, we have Melisandre, the Red Woman. I I think she's going to die, unless I mean she's technically already pretty much dead. She's like a 1,000-year-old woman, and she just looks like she's like this like 35, 40-year-old woman, but she's really old as hell. I just she's important, but her purpose is already gone. I think that her purpose has already been served. I just don't see her having a need to stay alive in this show anymore, unless she's part of the big reveal about who is Azor Ahai, which I think that I don't think that she's even really going to come back. So it might be like a Stannis situation where she just kind of doesn't really come back and we just kind of accept it as it is because all the other big players are in the works right now. The next two names, we have Miss Sandy, who is, one of Daenerys Targaryen's right-hand women. And, I mean, she could die, but at the same time, I was surprised she wasn't on this list. I mean, she could die, but she's not really important. I don't think she's gonna get out there and fight unless something happens if she's north of the wall with them, which I don't think she'll do because she's never really been known to fight or do hand-to-hand combat. This last one though, I think that he is definitely going to die. You have Grey Worm. So Grey Worm is, he's the leader of the Unsullied. He's like the military commander for Daenerys Targaryen when it comes to the Unsullied. I think that he is doomed. He's going to die. There's no need to keep him alive anymore. We're in the final season. All the stakes are high. Just get rid of him. Just wipe this dude out. We already know that he can fight. We already know that he's this badass, glorified, unsullied dude. His time is done. But those were the three that I would really add to this list. And when it comes to you guys, I actually wanted to ask, who do you guys think will die in season 8? I'd like to hear some feedback. I want to hear what you guys think. And we'll talk about odds. I want to say like, hey, I think this guy should be on the list or this woman should be on the list or whatever. Because I don't necessarily agree with this list completely, but at the same time, it's odds that were already placed on the internet. So I can only go with what I see on there. And for this next episode coming up next Sunday, my buddy Matthew Leonardo is going to come on, and he was the one that's going to talk about why he thinks Jaime Lannister is Azor Ahai. He's got all these prophecies. He's a big guy into reading the books, and he's got all these different theories that he think is going to happen, or he thinks will happen. And he actually wanted me to read this prophecy from Quaithe of the Shadow, which, if you can remember in season 1, is the witch essentially that killed Khal Drogo. She did all the blood magic, and that led to Khal Drogo being a vegetable. But if you can recall, she actually says at the beginning, she says, to go north, you must go south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. To touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. So I'm going to let him talk into more detail about what this all means and what he believes it's going to mean in this next season. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's been a great episode, guys. I'm happy to talk Game of Thrones with you. And yeah, thank you very much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode coming next week. Thank you very much, guys.